Welcome to Killer Now. In today's video, we will analyze the case of Lizzie Borden, a story that marked Fall River, Massachusetts, and still sparks controversy to this day. Let's open the case file. Lizzie Andrew Borden was born on July 19, 1860, in Fall River, Massachusetts, to Andrew Jackson Borden and Sarah Anthony Morse Borden. Her early life was marked by tragedy when her mother died in 1863, when Lizzie was just 2 years old. 3 years later, her father remarried to Abby Durfee Gray, bringing a stepmother into the household where Lizzie and her older sister Emma were being raised. Andrew Borden, despite being a descendant of one of Fall River's oldest and most influential families, grew up in modest circumstances. Through determined effort, he built a successful career as a businessman, becoming a property developer, bank president, and director of several textile mills. By the time of his death, he had amassed a fortune worth approximately $300,000, equivalent to $10 million today. Despite his considerable wealth, Andrew was known for his extreme frugality. The family home on 2nd Street lacked modern conveniences like indoor plumbing and electricity, even though such amenities were common in homes of their social standing. This parsimony created tension within the household, particularly with his daughters who aspired to the lifestyle of Fall River's elite society known as the Hill. Lizzie developed into a respectable young woman, becoming active in church affairs at the Central Congregational Church. She taught Sunday school and engaged in charitable work, building a reputation as a proper Christian woman of good standing in the community. However, beneath this veneer of respectability, the Borden household harbored underlying tensions. The relationship between Lizzie and her stepmother was particularly strained. Lizzie reportedly referred to Abby as Mrs. Borden rather than mother, and the sisters rarely dined with their parents. Lizzie allegedly believed that Abby had married her father for his money and harbored concerns that her stepmother's family sought access to the Borden fortune. Financial disputes further complicated family dynamics. When Abby's sister received a house from Andrew, the sisters demanded comparable compensation. In the weeks before the murders, they sold a property back to their father for $5,000, possibly exacerbating tensions over inheritance and property matters. By 1892, the 32-year-old Lizzie still lived at home, unmarried in an era when spinsterhood carried social stigma. The Borden household on 2nd Street had become a pressure cooker of resentments, financial disagreements, and unspoken animosities that would soon erupt into headline news that would shock the nation. In the morning of August 4, 1892, the Borden household in Fall River, Massachusetts became the scene of one of America's most infamous crimes. The day began routinely enough, with Andrew Borden leaving to conduct business downtown around 9 a.m., leaving his wife Abby, his daughter Lizzie, and their Irish maid Bridget Sullivan at home. Emma Borden was away visiting friends in Fairhaven. Sometime around 9:30 a.m., as Abby Borden was making the guest bedroom on the 2nd floor, an assailant entered the room. The attacker approached Abby from behind and delivered a crushing blow to her skull with a sharp, heavy object. The initial strike was followed by a frenzied assault. In total, Abby Borden was struck 19 times with what investigators later determined was likely a hatchet. She died face down on the floor between the bed and wall, her head brutally disfigured by the savage attack. Approximately 90 minutes later, Andrew Borden returned home. Finding the front door locked, he needed to use his key to enter. After entering, he settled on the sitting room sofa for a nap. As was his custom after his morning business, the killer seized this opportunity. While Andrew slept, the assailant approached silently and struck him 11 times with the same or a similar weapon. The blows were concentrated on his face and head with such violence that one eye was cut in half and his face was rendered nearly unrecognizable. Around 11:10 a.m., Lizzie called out to Bridget, who had been resting in her 3rd-floor room after cleaning windows all morning. "Maggie, come down quick. Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." Lizzie claimed she had just returned from the barn and discovered her father's mutilated body. Authorities were summoned, and upon investigating the house, they discovered Abby's body upstairs. What made the crime especially shocking was not just its brutality, but the apparent calculation behind it. The murders occurred in broad daylight in a respectable neighborhood, with houses in close proximity. The killer had somehow entered, committed 2 savage attacks separated by more than an hour, and departed without being seen by neighbors. Even more disturbing was the methodical nature of the crimes, the careful sequencing that ensured no witness remained alive, suggesting a cold, calculated plan rather than a crime of passion. The mystery of who could have committed such a horrific act in this seemingly ordinary household would soon grip the nation. Following the discovery of the bodies, Lizzie Borden's account of her whereabouts during the murders became the central focus of the investigation. In her initial statements to neighbors and first responders, Lizzie claimed she had been in the barn behind the house, searching for lead to make sinkers for a fishing trip. According to her, she spent 20-30 minutes in the loft eating pears and looking through old iron, completely unaware of the horror unfolding inside her home. However, inconsistencies in Lizzie's story quickly emerged. Officer George Medley, who examined the barn shortly after the murders, noted that the thick dust on the floor showed no footprints, and the stifling summer heat made it unlikely anyone would voluntarily spend time in the poorly ventilated loft. Moreover, when neighbors arrived at the scene, they observed that Lizzie's dress was immaculate, unusual for someone who claimed to have been rummaging through a dusty barn loft. When questioned about her movements that morning, Lizzie's answers became increasingly contradictory. At first, she said she came downstairs after hearing a groan or scraping noise. Later, she claimed she had heard nothing unusual, but simply discovered her father's body. In some accounts, she stated she had been ironing handkerchiefs before going to the barn. In others, she mentioned reading a magazine. Each retelling introduced new elements and timelines. The most damaging evidence against Lizzie's alibi came during the inquest when Alice Russell, a family friend who stayed with the sisters after the murders, testified that she witnessed Lizzie burning a blue dress in the kitchen stove 3 days after the crimes. When asked about this, Lizzie claimed the dress was stained with paint and no longer wearable. Yet the timing of the destruction appeared highly suspicious to investigators. Further, complicating matters, the Borden's maid Bridget Sullivan had her own incomplete alibi. She testified that she had been washing windows outside during the time frame when Abby was killed, and later resting in her attic room when Andrew was murdered. However, she admitted to leaving the house briefly that morning, creating a window of uncertainty about her exact whereabouts. The family's live-in Irish servant and Lizzie's maternal uncle John Morse, who had unexpectedly visited the night before and was out during both murders, also fell under suspicion. Morse provided an unusually detailed account of his morning activities, which some investigators found suspiciously precise and rehearsed. With no witnesses to the crimes and multiple household members offering incomplete or inconsistent alibis, investigators faced the challenging task of determining who among them might have committed the brutal murders. On the afternoon of August 4, 1892, the Fall River Police Department launched what would become one of the most scrutinized murder investigations in American history. Officers secured the Borden home at 92 2nd Street, where they encountered a puzzling crime scene. The brutal nature of the killing suggested a crime of rage, yet the house showed no signs of forced entry or robbery. No blood-soaked clothing was found, and the presumed murder weapon remained elusive. Medical examiner William Dolan arrived to examine the bodies, determining that Abby had been killed between 10 and 9:30 a.m., while Andrew died between 10:30 and 11 a.m. This significant time gap between murders raised questions about the killer's movements. How could someone commit such bloody acts and remain undetected in or near the house for over an hour? The police's initial search of the property yielded a crucial discovery in the cellar: a hatchet head with a broken handle. Though it appeared clean, closer examination revealed several strands of hair adhering to the blade that seemed consistent with Abby Borden's. Additionally, officers found a hatchet handle that appeared to have been recently cut down. These items were immediately seized as potential evidence. What particularly struck investigators was Lizzie's demeanor throughout their inquiry. Unlike the distraught behavior expected of someone whose parents had been brutally murdered, Lizzie remained remarkably composed, almost unnaturally calm. She answered questions in a detached manner, showed no tears, and displayed what officers described as an icy reserve. This coldness, coupled with her contradictory statements about her whereabouts during the murders, intensified police suspicion. The investigation gained momentum when a pharmacy clerk, Eli Bentz, came forward with the information that Lizzie had attempted to purchase prussic acid, a deadly poison, the day before the murders. When questioned about this, Lizzie denied ever entering the pharmacy, despite multiple witnesses confirming her presence. This apparent deception further undermined her credibility. State Detective George Seaver took charge of the case on August 6th, bringing a more methodical approach. Under his direction, investigators interviewed neighbors who reported seeing Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove days after the murders, an action she explained away as disposing of a paint-stained garment, though the timing seemed suspicious. As the investigation progressed, other potential suspects were considered, including the Borden's maid, Bridget Sullivan, and Lizzie's uncle, John Morse. However, the mounting inconsistencies in Lizzie's statements, her unusual behavior, and circumstantial evidence increasingly led investigators to focus their attention on her as their prime suspect. 1 week after the murders, on August 11, 1892, Lizzie Andrew Borden was formally arrested and charged with the double homicide. The Borden murders instantly captivated public attention, transforming the previously unknown spinster from Fall River into a nationwide sensation. Within hours of the discoveries, reporters from Boston, New York, and beyond descended upon the small Massachusetts town, their telegraphed dispatches spreading news of the shocking crime across America. By August 5th, just 1 day after the murders, newspapers nationwide featured sensational headlines about the Fall River tragedy. The press coverage reflected the Victorian era's fascination with crime, while exposing deep social divides. Upper-class publications like the Boston Evening Transcript approached the case with restraint, finding it inconceivable that a woman of Lizzie's social standing could commit such savagery. In contrast, working-class papers like the Fall River Globe pursued more sensationalist coverage, highlighting class tensions and suggesting that wealth might shield Lizzie from justice. Lizzie's gender profoundly shaped public reaction. Victorian society held rigid views of womanhood, making the notion of a respectable, church-going woman committing violent patricide almost unthinkable. Many supporters rallied to her defense precisely because the crime seemed so incompatible with contemporary views of feminine nature. As one newspaper put it, "It is hardly conceivable that a young Christian woman could suddenly become transformed into a fiend incarnate." The religious community strongly supported Lizzie. Her fellow parishioners at Central Congregational Church publicly vouched for her character, collecting funds for her defense. Meanwhile, members of Fall River's working class, particularly the large Irish immigrant community, tended to believe in her guilt, revealing ethnic and class divisions within the city. The case touched on multiple societal tensions: the changing role of women, who were beginning to seek more independence, fears about violence lurking beneath respectable middle-class facades, and anxieties about family dynamics in the rapidly industrializing America. Was Lizzie a victim of circumstantial evidence and gender-based prosecution, or a calculating killer who exploited gender stereotypes to escape justice? The case's unprecedented media coverage introduced new journalistic practices. Newspapers published floor plans of the Borden home, detailed timelines, and even early attempts at crime scene photography. Reporters competed for exclusive interviews and paid for access to those connected to the case. This sensational coverage transformed the private tragedy into public entertainment, creating what many consider America's first nationwide media circus surrounding a murder case. By the time Lizzie's trial began in June 1893, The Borden case had become more than a murder investigation. It had evolved into a national referendum on class privilege, gender roles, and the American justice system itself. The public's fascination with the case reflected deeper anxieties about the changing social landscape of late 19th century America, where traditional certainties about family, gender, and social class were increasingly called into question. The trial, Lizzie Borden. On June 5, 1893, after nearly 10 months of anticipation, the trial of Lizzie Borden began at the New Bedford courthouse. The proceedings captured national attention, with newspapers across the country providing daily coverage. The courtroom was consistently filled to capacity, requiring tickets for entry, with crowds gathering outside to catch glimpses of the infamous defendant. District Attorney Hosea Knowlton led the prosecution, building a case entirely on circumstantial evidence. He methodically established motive, arguing that Lizzie resented her stepmother and feared her father would distribute his estate to favor Abby's relatives. Knowlton highlighted Lizzie's attempt to purchase prussic acid the day before the murders, her contradictory statements about her whereabouts, and the suspicious burning of her dress days after the crimes. The prosecution also emphasized the lack of forced entry into the home, suggesting the killer was someone the victims trusted. The defense team, led by former Massachusetts Governor George Robinson, countered with arguments about the physical impossibility of Lizzie committing such bloody murders without leaving evidence on her clothing or person. They challenged the timeline, questioning how Lizzie could have committed both murders, cleaned up, and changed clothes without being detected in the small house. Robinson repeatedly emphasized Victorian gender expectations, implying that a woman of Lizzie's social standing and Christian character was incapable of such brutality. The trial featured several dramatic moments, including the presentation of the victims' skulls in the courtroom, which reportedly caused Lizzie to faint. The testimony of Alice Russell about Lizzie burning the dress proved particularly damaging. However, the judge excluded crucial evidence, including Lizzie's conflicting statements during the inquest, deeming them improperly obtained since she hadn't been informed of her right against self-incrimination. Throughout the proceedings, Lizzie maintained a composed demeanor, dressed in fashionable black attire befitting a mourning daughter. She never took the stand in her own defense, speaking only once to correct the record regarding her age. Her sister Emma sat supportively nearby throughout the 13-day trial. On June 20, 1893, after only an hour and a half of deliberation, the all-male jury returned with their verdict, not guilty on all charges. When the verdict was announced, Lizzie showed little emotion, simply stating, "I am innocent. I thank you." The courtroom erupted in applause from her supporters, while others expressed outrage at what they perceived as justice influenced by class and gender privilege. The trial's outcome demonstrated the high standard of proof required in American jurisprudence, beyond reasonable doubt, especially when conventional social expectations made the accused an unlikely murderer. Despite her acquittal in the courtroom, Lizzie would face a different verdict in the court of public opinion for the remainder of her life. Following her acquittal on June 20, 1893, Lizzie Borden returned to Fall River a legally innocent woman, but her life would never return to normalcy. Within weeks of the verdict, she made the decision to remain in her hometown, despite widespread ostracism. Using her substantial inheritance of approximately $200,000, equivalent to nearly $7 million today, Lizzie and Emma purchased a stately house in the fashionable hill neighborhood of Fall River, which Lizzie named Maplecroft. The move represented Lizzie's long-desired ascent into the city's elite society, though her reception there would prove far from welcoming. Fall River's response to Lizzie's continued presence was swift and merciless. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. She was banned from her beloved Central Congregational Church, where she had once taught Sunday school. Local merchants refused to serve her directly. The whispers and pointed fingers followed her everywhere, forcing her to conduct much of her business through intermediaries. The sisters lived as social outcasts, with even their extended family maintaining a careful distance. In 1897, Lizzie's notoriety flared again when she was accused of shoplifting in Providence, Rhode Island. Though the matter was settled without criminal charges, the incident reinforced public perception of her character. More scandal followed in 1905 when Lizzie developed a close friendship with actress Nance O'Neill, hosting parties for theater people, considered scandalous company for a woman of her standing. This apparent rebellion against social norms proved too much for Emma, who abruptly moved out of Maplecroft that year. The sisters, once inseparable, never spoke again. Lizzie lived her remaining years in increasing isolation, surrounded by her pets and a small circle of loyal friends. On June 1, 1927, she died of pneumonia at age 66. 9 days later, Emma also passed away. They were buried side by side in the family plot at Oak Grove Cemetery, alongside the father and stepmother whose murders had defined their lives. The Borden case permanently altered American crime reporting and public fascination with murder trials. The sensational coverage established patterns that would be followed in countless high-profile cases thereafter. The murders entered American folklore, immortalized in the infamous rhyme, "Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. More than a century later, the Borden murders remain officially unsolved. The Fall River house where the crimes occurred operates as a bed and breakfast, attracting thousands of visitors annually. Scholars, criminologists, and amateur sleuths continue to debate the evidence, proposing alternative theories and suspects. Despite her legal exoneration in the court of public memory, Lizzie Borden remains forever linked to one of the most notorious, unsolved crimes in American history. A case that continues to fascinate precisely because its true resolution may never be known. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss new cases, and leave your opinion in the comments.